This is the August 14th meeting of the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Housing Committee. And I'll quickly take the roll. The Assistant Mayor Kelly is not able to join us tonight. Councilor Moreau.
Here.
And Tracy Kozak is absent. Andrew.
Here.
Eric.
Here.
Byron.
Here.
Mary is absent. John.
Here.
And Dagan.
Here.
Okay, and from staff we have Peter
Peter.
Britton. Peter Stitt. You guys must be
Easy enough.
tired of that.
Peter squared.
Just
As long as Peter Rice isn't here, we're
right.
And it's Peter cubed.
It's triangulation.
Yeah.
We have some minutes to approve. Has anybody had a chance to read those? Any corrections, amplifications?
One from Jen Stebbins who emailed about
That's right,
it, so
about her.
we'll make that correction.
Yes, we identified one of our developers that we interviewed as her late father, and it was Mark McNabb. And wait a motion for approval of the minutes.
You got it.
Okay,
Second.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I also put on the agenda tonight, well, a couple things, if you don't mind, a few chairman's remarks before we start. We're gonna hear from the Housing Trust Fund. Jeff Cooper is here. I also had a request from several members for a Sherburne update. And I contacted Craig Welch. He would love to talk to the committee, but he is taking his son to college today, so he's not able to do today. He's gonna do our September meeting. So, in essence, the Sherburne project is still going through the land use boards, and it goes for the planning board
Next Thursday.
next Thursday. Right now, the plan that's submitted is all 127 units, including the old school. But at the TAC meeting, city's attorney, Trevor McCourt, said the project may go in phases. I don't know much more about that than what's on the public record. And had we been able to get Craig, he could have filled us in. I believe it has to do with the tax credits. The tax credits are in a volatile situation right now. Some of those questions I don't think we'll be able to answer till Craig is here in September, but they're worth asking. Let's stay on the agenda if I could.
Can I just go back to?
Yeah.
Chairman? If you don't mind, I would like to have a discussion about it even without him
Okay.
here. I'm frankly, I don't work very often, but I'm scheduled to work on the 11th of September.
Okay.
And so I'd like to have an opportunity to express my concerns and questions.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
I'd also like to, continue this discussion on Sherburne. I know Craig's not here. I took the opportunity to meet with Trevor McCourt, and he brought me up to speed, at least with some of the concerns with the city as the project stands. So I'd like to report on that, at least for what he told me,
Great.
if it has any value for the committee.
You got me beat. I
What's
haven't.
that?
You've got me beat. I didn't have that conversation, so I'd like to hear what you learned. Going back to the Housing Trust Fund, if we can suspend the rules to allow Jeff Cooper to talk to the committee and Karen.
Motion to suspend the rules?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And you're representing the Arts and Culture Committee?
Yes.
Yeah.
And specifically within the Arts and Culture Committee, there's a work group that is focusing, it's called the Collaborations and Resources Work Group. And we've been focusing on artist live work studio space. And so as you know, we've been actively advocating that the old school at Sherburne be as an adaptive reuse, that be doing that. And we've been actively advocating for that here, and with Portsmouth Housing Authority. So I think that the artist group in Portsmouth is a subgroup of workforce housing that we're representing in terms of our whole commission is looking out for the best interests of the arts and the artist community, and we've identified LiveWork Studio Space as a high priority. So the overlap, I mean, we understand that for you guys, just general workforce housing is your bailiwick, and we're focused on artist LiveWork Studio Space, but there is a crossover because artists are a subgroup of the workforce that is in need of affordable housing. And we think that it's particularly important to the Portsmouth culture because of the outsized contribution of the arts community to the Portsmouth economy. So that's why we're coming to you. So as and I would say also that our work group is in the midst of preparing a pretty comprehensive report to the City Council, which we're planning to deliver October 20th. And about Artist LiveWorks Studio Space. And so our coming here is kind of a research effort on our part, because we've done a lot of research about projects of this nature nationwide. We know that POA, who was the runner-up, you know who POA is, they have an ongoing project right now in Dorchester, Mass, for Artist LiveWorks Studio Space. We've also been in contact with a company called ArtSpace, which does this on a nationwide basis. So the idea of Artist LiveWorks Studio Space is nothing really new, and it is something which lots of cities and towns are tackling with municipal support. So in doing this research, we found that almost always for a project to be successful has involved some level of philanthropy. For example, the project that Poe is doing in Dorchester, there was a land trust that donated the land on which the project is being built. So the whole thing happened starting with the city initiative, because the city of Dorchester wanted to do it. They identified a site that was near, what did it say, it was across from a theater?
Yeah, on all of the amenities, so in close proximity.
Right, so in
Yeah.
kind of an arts district
Yeah.
within Dorchester, and this land trust purchased and donated the land for the project. And our research has found out that in almost every successful project, some level of philanthropy is needed. And so we looked and we said, well, is there any equivalent to this trust fund that did that in Dorchester, here in Portsmouth, and is other than the Housing Trust Fund for something that's existing? As far as we know, there's not. So that if somebody wanted to support this kind of a thing with a financial contribution, where do they send the money? And now the other constraint that we have is that our committee cannot, according to our ordinance that created us, cannot do any fundraising in any way, shape, or form, because it would create a conflict of interest for some of our members. And the reason it's a conflict of interest is because some of our members are actually the institutions and not the individuals. So for example, Eli Kaner is on our commission representing PMAC. PMAC is the actual member rather than Ellie. And so there's an obvious, there's a member of Chinburg's who is on their board of directors. So you can see why there's obvious conflicts of interest. The other three organizations that are members are the Arts Festival, the Strawberry Bank, and the Historical Society. So that's why we're constrained from doing any fundraising at all, like cannot even touch it. So we were looking for, the first question came to our mind is there anything already in existence which could work as this vehicle?
I can just add a couple other
Yes.
comments as well. And I think the big picture of what we're all trying to accomplish here is really how can we best keep artists around and keep them in Portsmouth, so retaining them, attracting new artists. I'm an artist myself, Jeffrey's an artist. And we see that as a business imperative, but the community does as well. So a lot of what we do on the commission is we're executing on the cultural plan. That's our goal.
Which
And
we
I was-
both helped to write.
Right, that was something I had co-chaired and just a lot of tremendous support. So there was extensive community feedback that artists, multiple members of the community in all different facets really want to see more artists live workspace in Portsmouth. And right now, although, some wonderful news that for homeowners, of course, we've got the new home occupation allows artists to teach on their home studios. That's incredible, and that will be great for homeowners. But there's all sorts of other artists that are in need of other types of space, affordable space, rental space, etc. So again, that's the big picture here, is how can we keep artists here as a business imperative for the city for many, many, many years to come. And we have lost a lot. I mean, we know that. So that's really why we're coming, is to work with you, because artists need affordable housing. A lot of artists don't make a lot of money, so as Jeffrey said, they are a subset of this population. So we really want to collaborate with you to see how we can make this happen and work, continue to work on the great work you're all doing.
So the key thing that's unique with the artists is that they end up paying 2 rentals. If there was a live work studio space opportunity for them, they have 1 rental, and it's
Their
economical.
mortgage, yeah.
Either a mortgage or a rent plus
Yeah.
a studio, whatever. And it's such a big advantage to them to be able to consolidate. So that's why we've been advocating so hard at the Sherburne School, but we're looking to do it. Now, the other thing that, as you know, has been on the table is creating an artist overlay, and what's the word for it? An
Arts
overlay
district.
district
Yeah.
for in the West End. And one of the questions that the art space people asked us first thing was, do you have an artist overlay district? Now they work as a consultant, but it's a fee-based consultancy. So from our point of view, it's like if we wanted to do a feasibility study, there's a fee right up front. Where does it come from? So that's why we're looking for a trust. We're looking for where would that money come from. We know it's not going to get through on the city's budget. It has to come through some sort of a thing. So now I have, I did have a conversation with John on the phone the other day, who spoke to Trevor McCourt, advising the separate creation of an artist housing trust fund separate from the existing housing trust fund. And we get that. At the same time, we're wondering if within the existing housing trust fund, there could be a little designated corner or whatever, because of what I was saying earlier about our constraint about not being able to fundraise. So then it becomes the immediate 2 questions. If we create, if a city councilor proposed and passed the creation of an artist housing trust fund in addition to the existing housing trust fund, and it passed the city council and became the new trust fund within the suite of trust funds that the city runs, who are the directors and how does it get funded and how do you ask people to contribute to it and everything like that? How do you publicize the fact that it exists, given the constraints that our committee has? That's a big hurdle for us. So as I said, our being here is, yes, to try and put this issue on your radar screen when you're thinking about workforce housing, to have somewhere in your mind this subset, which, as I mentioned, is particularly impactful on the Portsmouth economy. So it's partly to put it on your radar screen, but also we're researching for our report to the city council so that I guess this is, we're here to find out what you all think of what we're saying and get a lot of feedback from you about those questions.
Questions for Jeff and John?
Well, my concern is, I'm sorry, Jeff, but you're all over the place. You're talking about Sherburne School, you're talking about a trust fund. What what are you looking for us to do? Because those are completely, in my mind anyways, completely different, issues. The Sherburne School, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. We were part of the process to determine who should be developing it. We made a recommendation to the council. The council has made a decision to go with Portsmouth Housing Authority. At this point in time, we can probably make some sort of a recommendation, but that's it. We don't have any ability, I don't believe, unless someone tells me something different, to direct Portsmouth Housing Authority to concentrate on an arts-based residential unit at the school. That's in their bailiwick right now. We don't have any control on what happens there, I don't believe, the way I see it. As far as the trust fund is concerned, I think that's certainly a separate item. Again, you've talked to Trevor, John was part of that conversation, I believe. I mean, if the city wants to set up a separate trust fund to deal with the issues that you've raised, again, that's probably, we could certainly, if it comes to us from the council asking for us to review it and see if it makes sense, we could probably make a recommendation at that point in time. But, I'm just not sure if that, I'm just not sure what you're asking us to do. That's where my concern is at this point in time.
Okay, when you're saying, that my presentation was all over the map, from our point of view, the commonality is Artist Live Work Studio Space.
Mhm.
We've been in touch with the Housing Authority, and they say to us repeatedly, their preferred option for the existing building is to make it Artist Live Work Studio Space. What influence you have over that or not, we don't know. But if there was, for example, a housing trust fund that had some funds, and it said to them, you know what, it's a little more expensive for you to make this into artist preferred studio space, and this trust fund can contribute this amount of dollars to make it a reality.
Mhm.
And they say, oh, great, thank you so much, that helps us greatly. Okay, so that's the commonality that we see. And how much influence you have over that, I don't know. I mean, that's up to you. I mean, if you're saying to them, you could, as a committee, say to them, we really hope this works out because we're supportive of it.
Sure.
I mean, like our organization, the commission, is strictly an advocacy organization. We have no clout over anything. The only thing we can do is come to people like here and say, we hope this will be on your radar screen in terms of that. So that answers that bucket.
That's fine.
The second part is about the housing trust and whether that can be a vehicle for it. We would like to explore a little bit further about the existing housing trust to see whether there's any adaptations, because at the moment is no, not a good idea. I mean, that's the feedback we got from Trevor McCourt.
Yeah.
That it's not a good idea, but we would like to, well, I guess maybe we need to have the conversation with him rather than with you. Because
I'll clarify what Trevor said, but I don't wanna, there
okay.
are more questions from Eric and from Jake.
Okay, so I guess because of the problems that I mentioned, from our point of view, creating a new trust has the problems I described. So we would like to be able to explore that a little further to make sure that that really is a closed door. And then when we make our report, like I said, this is an information gathering session for us. But if your organization says, oh yes, we're really supportive, then that means something.
Okay. Eric, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I think, I kind of tend to agree with John. You bring two big subjects to the table here that and I think in some reality with the fact that PHA has made some indication they would like to phase the project at Sherburne, we kind of have to take some serious consideration of that. We have not heard that from Craig, but he's made a public indication that they want to phase the project, which was different than their presentation. But even in their presentation, they made some indication that the school would be focused with an artist theme involved. Now let's get down to reality. If they go with the phase program, you're talking a minimum of 4 years before anything develops in that school. It's 2 years and 4 years from reality if you look at the procedural process that has, they're making application for funding, design, a whole bunch of other factors in it. So, whether you think there's some urgency to this, then I think reality has to be at least recognized that, you're 4 years out.
I think it's a start, and, as we look and we do our research, we don't have any dedicated artist work live space in the city of Portsmouth. The last known example that I researched was Cary Cottage, so we're going back quite a ways on that. And as Jeffrey mentioned, there's a lot of other cities and towns in New Hampshire and certainly across New England that have this. They have affordable artist work
Not a
space.
problem, I think.
And not suggesting that it be exclusive, because I know that's not permitted, but it could be preferred. There could be maybe some units that could be preferred for artists. Again, to benefit the broader community. So I appreciate your comment, and I don't think there is a race here. I mean, I think it's a start. And I think it would be a great start, even if it does take a while just to get something
My
underway.
concern with
Yeah.
PHA is that they've made that indication to phase it, where we all had the assumption that it would be one project performed at a single event, right? From financial purposes, I guess that might not play. In regards to the Housing Trust Fund, we're not even aware of there being a penny in that yet. So
Is that right?
we have an indication that it's going to be funded, but I think right here and now, there is no money in that fund. So, you should recognize that. And then again, when it is funded at some particular point in the future, then there has to be some discussion of, and if you think there's some, some contributions that could, private contributions that you could use this as a vehicle, I don't know. That the whole subject has to be explored with a little bit of detail, and I think Attorney McCourt will be able to provide the details for that. Maybe it might be best for you to pursue a separate trust fund and not this trust fund. I don't think we're completely knowledgeable about how the housing trust fund is gonna function when it's funded.
Right. Well, what you just said is actually a surprise to us. Or a
I
disappointment,
just wanted to bring it, I wanted to bring it.
No, we need to know that.
I'm not,
To the best of my knowledge, it has been funded.
Oh.
By the $500,000 based off of the settlement.
Well,
So,
at least we as a committee haven't been aware of that. We don't know that. I get, if that's what you say, then
well, because the
I stand
trustees of the
corrected.
trust funds manage the money, so they're the ones that are really in charge of it on a daily or monthly or whatever it is basis,
On a
so.
regular basis.
Regular basis, thank you,
So-
whatever else.
Well, who are the trustees and how are they appointed?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
okay, Dagan?
I had
Go ahead.
questions.
Oh, and, well, I had Dagan and then I had,
So my concern is whether or not workforce housing fits into the definition, if artist works, and thinking about this from just a nuts and bolts, you're renting space on a discounted based off your income, but you're making money. So, and how much money you're making, so you see where the income qualifications and so I think it's gonna really depend on what that artist's situation is in order to whether or not they would fit into a workforce housing mold. Whether or not you could then just find affordable housing with some sort of philanthropy, then that's a different story. But when you're truly talking about the legal ramifications of being workforce housing, which is I think probably why Trevor, we didn't think about that, and the trustees are going to be limited to the words that are on the page. So unless that was specifically called out, and I don't remember it being so, that might be where the pause is on that and why that is that way.
So if I understand
You
you,
got the clarification that I was gonna do.
the snag is that the artist could be a professional earning money on the site rather than living there to support a job downtown.
Right, and so it's how do we fit that model into the workforce housing model? And I think there needs to be more looking at that to try to figure out. And I really think we need a lawyer better than me to figure that out.
A lawyer that's more experienced in that area.
I'll go with better than me.
All right, well, thank you for that, because that's an important consideration for us.
Yeah, because they're gonna be making money, so you have to think about how is that gonna affect.
On the premise, they're earning
On
their
the-
money on the premise
And does that
rather
fit-
than elsewhere.
Exactly.
And there's gotta be an
that's-
answer to that, cause this definitely exists, so
But that's a question I
we'll
have
take
in
that
my
back
mind
and
listening to you is
do
like,
some more
okay,
research
how do
on
you
that.
fit into a true
Yeah.
definition?
Yeah.
We got Dagan and we got Andrew.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, you certainly have an ally in pushing for artists to be included in the type of workforce housing that we're trying to create here. You know, I think we need to go back and check the record, Eric, because my recollection of the Sherburne presentation from the PHA was that it was always phased. It was always a phase 1 and always a phase 2.
I don't recollect that at all.
Okay, well, I'm pretty sure we had conversations about what those two phases would look like prior to the vote in which PHA was chosen to be the one to develop the Sherburne property. And as you said in their presentation, they included in the school 8 units that would be live work studios for artists. And you probably do know this, but it bears repeating from a information gathering perspective, which is that PHA can't create preferences for certain individuals for obvious reasons, discrimination, but they can create preferences for artists.
Yeah.
And obviously that should be explored more. I'm not certain, I know you can't do fundraising, but I'm just thinking, obviously the arts are under attack right now from a funding perspective. Places like 3S are struggling to keep their doors open. But 3S's original mission was to have live workspaces.
Upstairs.
Yep, upstairs.
But
And,
it never happened for reasons we don't know.
well, while you can't do fundraising, can you do advocacy for on behalf of funds being raised? If that distinction makes sense, like, could you go to 3S and say, how do we figure out how to bring back the original mission with the space that's sitting vacant relatively upstairs? I mean, it's not going to be a ton of units, but people who are already aligned with your overall goal could be great allies for at a time right now when there's, we have to be taking advantage of every avenue that we have. And I just think they could also be allies, but more effective ones than even people sitting on this committee.
Great. So we had Andrew and John.
There are a lot of really educated people in this room, and one of which, Craig Welch, who is not here, we were talking about earlier, would probably say that it's very difficult to contribute private funds to an affordable housing project when you are talking about a specific tenant, because those tenants have to go through a pretty rigorous background of income verification and continuous income verification. So if you are talking about artists who have a variety of income streams, such as Venmo, like when I buy art at the Button Factory during Christmas time and I Venmo that artist, it's probably not reported on their income. So to get an artist into these affordable housing units where there's a stringent income verification process, I would advocate for you guys to research how that happens, because to incorporate artists into these units, while I'm for sure for that, I think that there are a lot of steps and processes in place that would conflict with that method.
Okay, so
Understand.
we're discussing the vetting process for who qualifies.
Correct. Because through their long wait list and existing tenants, they all have to send in a lot of income verification to do this. And if an artist is showing $10,000 on their income tax returns every year, or $100,000, it has to fit within the criteria of affordable housing. And that's a very difficult needle to thread when you are talking about allocating specific units or space to these people.
Right. Well, lots of artists are working outside jobs to support their art.
Again, that would have some sort of confliction,
Yeah.
but just a little thing to look into.
Byron, you were.
Yes, sorry. My question was just around what exactly, or what is an artist overlay district? What does that entail, as opposed to like what are the specifics, examples of that? I guess I'm interested versus some of the other overlay districts we have. Like what is specific about it that makes it artist related?
Yeah, I mean, I know one of the things that we're trying to gather feedback on right now from developers, and there's an email that we are issuing to developers to gain their feedback for this report that we're pulling together for city council, is what types of incentives would be meaningful to them related to an artist district. So I know that some of that's been collected in other ways, but relative to an arts district, are there things that we could do unique that would hopefully preserve the many art venues that we already have in the West End and prevent them from being torn down? And so I think that's the goal here is, try to get, this is, today's an information gathering, the developers are an information gathering, we're doing a lot of research. I think we're trying to figure out everything that we can to
I think the
have
big,
an arts district.
the
And it's not
big,
just a sign that we're gonna stick in the ground, but it would have
Right,
actually, some.
the big
Yeah.
risk is studio space being converted to high-end housing.
Sure.
And so, what are the incentives for a developer to maintain a property as an artist-friendly property, rather than a tear down and build, a West End Yards or something like that? What would be meaningful to them? And I know, I came to the other meeting all about developer incentives for workforce housing. I'm not sure what developer incentives could there be, but I mean, that's the risk. And we're basically looking at the patterns that have happened in other cities. There's even a name for it. They call it the Soho effect, of when the artists make a place chic and then get priced out and move on. So, in a sense, our whole commission as an advocacy organization is trying to figure out what support can the city do so that we can dodge that bullet and keep the artist community here, because, as I said, we have an outsized contribution to the local economy. So we don't want to become, just a wedding destination or, just a high-end retirement community, right? So, in terms of the culture here, so at this point, we really can't say what would be in the incentives built into the district. And I did speak to Kevin, who said that the legal department is, in fact, working on this, how that plays out. And like we said, we're an advocacy organization. So we're just trying to put this stuff on everybody's radar screen, I'm repeating myself, sorry.
So, sorry to interrupt. I think what you're trying to get at is how do you leverage non-developed property right now for the future use of artist studios or live work studios. So to that, I would say come back with data that shows how much these studios rent for or how much these combined spaces could rent for, because when we're talking about economics of developing a property from artist studio spaces to high-end luxury condos are going to win 10 times out of 10. I think we all can say that. So now, where are we going in terms of development? Where we're looking at the Route 1 corridor and converting places like West Road, Constitution Avenue, Heritage Ave into residential gateway zoning. So those are currently undeveloped in terms of residential zones that you guys can start looking at, where there's a density calculation and then there's an economic calculation. If the developer is going to hit a density calculation and they can't derive any more housing units out of that, but they need to make the economic calculation work, how will they do that? Well, maybe they can add studio art space to that calculation and come up with a better economic model for themselves. And by nature of that, say, oh, who do we want to build this building for? Well, now it's artist spaces because of the combined entity. Does that make sense?
Great. What you just said makes perfect sense. I wish I absorbed all of it. And,
This is being recorded. You can listen to it again later.
You can listen to it half speed.
I don't even talk that fast.
yeah, well, I'm saying, you want to be on our committee.
I got enough of those.
All right.
And Andrew, we
John,
were looking at
you
different
were-
models and doing field trips to different models by different developers, and some have galleries that may be ways of generating income to the developer or the building owner.
Generating income or their tax write-offs.
Right,
Yes,
but in a
yeah.
sense, what you just explained is the reason why some sort of philanthropy always needs to be involved to make them work.
The incentive could be a tax write-off rather than giving them money up front.
Okay.
John, did you have another question? or you
Yes.
said?
Just a couple, well, a question and a comment. You mentioned that there are other cities and towns in New Hampshire that have artist overlay districts.
Nashua
Artist
does?
live workspace.
Whatever terminology
Yeah.
you want to use.
They're living and working in the same building, same entity.
And again, if you can provide us the information with regards
Yeah.
to what those are, then
Yes.
obviously the staff can, research that and determine if that's something that will go, that can be brought forward. In other words, let's not start from square one, let's use, what's already in place in other communities
Yeah,
and determine whether that's something that can be brought forward in Portsmouth.
Yeah, and that will be in the report. We actually have specific case studies of other cities, some in New Hampshire, some at least in New England, in terms of what their model is.
Yeah. And then the other is more of a comment, and the fact is that the Housing Trust Fund, just like any of the trust funds that are with the city, are reduced to a document that indicates what it's used for, who's eligible, and the whole thing. And what I'm gathering, and this is probably what John was going to talk about, and listening in the conversation, is that right now the Housing Trust Fund doesn't have wording that would include what you're talking about. So there's a couple of things, first of all, is it consistent with the goal of the trust fund? And I don't know whether it is or not, or whether it's contrary or all of that, but again, and then the other thing we have to think about is that any of these trust documents not only get approved by the city council, but frankly, have to go to the Attorney General's office. And so that they may, again, they have their own rules as far as what a trust does. And if there's verbiage in there that's contrary to their rules, then it just doesn't get approved. Is that fair?
That's
So
the
again, that's
essence of
part of it too.
Yeah, that's the essence of it. I hope this has been helpful to you.
Yes,
We're
absolutely.
all working for the same thing
Yeah.
in whatever creative ways we can. Mark me down in favor of artist space, and I think, Jeff, you make the point that an artist has to pay studio space and the cost of a home, and if you can combine those for a developer, that's a revenue stream. So there's a way to do this, I think. We'll keep exploring the trust fund ins and outs, and hope we've been helpful to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
well,
you for all
thank
the
you for your
feedback.
time and your feedback.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting it on our radar.
Great,
And thank you. Appreciate it.
Next up, we had the low interest housing loan fund. I put in your packet.
Excuse me, what about Sherman? Well, no, let's go.
Oh, I took it out of order. I'm sorry. Sherburne update.
Well, what about? I asked that an item for the Housing Trust Fund be put under my name back 3 months ago. And I thought this item that said Housing Trust Fund was that, but obviously it wasn't.
Well, let's.
I'm getting a little, I'm sorry. Didn't I ask this back in May?
You are correct.
And so it's been completely ignored, and it was substituted with this presentation we just had.
We had that request. But we can take up.
My request doesn't mean a damn thing.
We can take it up right now, John. I mean, if you were planning on that as the item,
Did I ask, how many times did I ask that be put on the agenda?
it was requested in writing, yes.
Multiple times.
Are you prepared to do it tonight?
I was,
Okay, let's go. If the problem's not a problem, that's not a problem. If you're ready, let's go.
can I ask why it wasn't put on there?
My error.
You've said that 3 months in a row.
I'm sorry, it was a request from May and June, and it was not top of mind for me.
So when I saw Housing Trust Fund on the agenda, I thought that was my item, but obviously it wasn't.
But we can right now.
Okay. Let's go on to
Because we
Sherman
need
and
to,
I'll bring it
because-
up
Okay.
after that.
My apologies, John. That slipped my mind. And, you know, but we can take it up. Sherburne, as I said, we don't have Craig Welch tonight. What is in the public record is that the TAC met and reviewed a traffic study, geotechnical information, and site plans. Those site plans are going forward to the planning board on the 21st. And they show what we referred to as the L building and the other building and the school. All 127 units is what's there now. We don't have clarity on what's in phases. I don't, but that's where I'll end. And you know, we have the opportunity to talk to Craig in September. But Eric, you mentioned that you had a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I only, had some curiosity and I thought the answers would be attainable through Trevor, and it was productive discussion, I guess, for whatever purpose I'll explain here. But, I was concerned initially when there was a public announcement that the project was gonna be phased and that the city had to look, but even under TAC, it was presented as a full one-time project. Even under the planning board, it is being presented as a one full-time project, or I say full-time, a complete
I
project.
can make some comments on that. if you-
What's that?
I can make some comments on that after you.
I just read it on, as it was printed out on the, planning board agenda. There was no indication of phasing or anything of that nature, but maybe you can correct me on that,
Sure,
because.
I think their plan is to, because they have to apply for the financing and tax credits. And they're gonna apply for the big building, the 90 units, as, we're gonna call it Project 1 and 2. And then, next year, within 2 years, apply for the second project or phase, which includes the 29 unit building and renovation of the school for 8 units. But they want to get it approved, so they can go forward saying, hey, we've gotten approval for this. But it's going to happen it's not going to happen all at once. It's going to be,
And the city had to, at least according to Trevor, if this was a private developer who was submitting a plan for development, they could, and it was accepted, a private developer could not come back and make a request for phasing.
right, we don't have a
But there is,
phasing
but
process.
there is that opportunity within a municipal piece of property that they can, and it was even in the, it was even expressed in the option ground lease and the, as I read them in the land use compliance reports that allowed for this to take place because it's municipal property. There's only a certain amount of ordinances that they have to comply with. The phasing was allowed. This was a concerning point to me because even though I might agree, everything I heard through all the processes of presentations from PHA was that the project was not going to be phased. It was going to be started and completed as 127 units. And that's what I think a lot of people assumed, at least I did. And when this phasing into.
Are you getting that from the proposal?
What's that?
Are you getting that from the proposal that they submitted as the, are you getting that from the proposal that they submitted as the RFP?
Yes, and also any time that there was any type of public information on that, verbal public information. And I completely recollect that. So, but that's not the point of the issue here. It's probably gonna go forward as a phased project. It's allowed from the, it's allowed from a city perspective because it's a municipal piece of property. They've made application for the financing. The final approval of any financing that PHA is requesting won't be determined until December 11th. So there's a period of time that they'll review all the applications that are in front of them and make some type of final approval in December. And at least pending any funding situation, he thought it was highly probable that there wouldn't be any possibility of groundbreaking at the Sherburne site for at least a year after that. So, I mean, I'm only passing, I don't want to speak for him, I'm only speaking from what he indicated to me.
And he's willing,
And I wish he was here to verify that, but I mean, it's only that he took the opportunity to have that discussion in a series of questions. It might be also informative to this committee that Service Federal Credit and POA has withdrawn their application for development. So that, I don't know if that's publicly known, but I think that's a piece of information that
Do we have
at
color
least-
on that?
What's that?
Do we have any background?
I think they're just kind of redesigning or going back to the drawing board about how they're gonna get financing.
I think it was,
that's-
about financing, about the
they
project,
have
so.
withdrawn their application they submitted.
Because otherwise they're up against the clock.
Whatever reason, that's up to them. So that project isn't, was one that was kind of a bright light in this whole,
Well, it's gonna go forward.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
just
think
been delayed.
It's not dead in the water.
Yeah, it's not
Right.
dead, it's just delayed.
well, if they withdraw their application, then they have to make another application, right?
Yeah, and that's their plan.
All right, so I guess you must know more about it than I do, but that's all I received from information is that they withdrew their application. I don't know if that meant the project was dead, if it was financing, if there was other situations that caused them to withdraw their application, but they would have to submit another one
And they
to start the project again.
That's the plan.
We'll
I
wait,
think
we'll
they-
wait for that to happen, I guess,
Yeah,
as
they had only
revisit.
gone to design review, right?
No, they came for a preliminary conceptual.
Yeah.
Yeah, preliminary
Yeah, they have
conceptual, they
discovered.
haven't even
They
submitted.
still wanna do the project.
Yeah.
It's just,
And I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity to, and maybe I could be corrected on this, but currently, the city still is in possession of the Sherburne property. They have an option agreement with PHA, but there's no binding, there hasn't been any binding transfer of that property to PHA at the moment. That'll take place somewhere in, according to Trevor, late December. That any type of final document, if it's to go forward, will go forward at that time. It's almost gonna be after they'll receive any indication of their funding, the funding award on December 11th. So we'll see what happens there. But one thing in reading the option to ground lease or the land use agreement, and maybe I could be informed in this, there is nothing in those documents if all of a sudden there was a final agreement that came forward that would bind PHA to maintain the Sherburne School in some capacity so that it could be redeveloped. I don't think this, I've read it twice and I could have missed it, but there is no binding obligation for them to keep that building in the condition for redevelopment. And I wish that any final document would include that type of language. So over the next 2 years or 4 years, as they phase any project, that school will not fall into deterioration, into a condition that of deterioration, so it can't be reused. And I think that's an important component. PHA has presented their proposal to include that school, and it wasn't their option, it wasn't their preference initially, but they incorporated it into their presentation because they saw some of the competitors, including the school, in reuse. So, I mean, that's more of an opinion than it is fact, but they did present their proposal with the school being part of the redevelopment. And I wish there's some assurity that there's some type of binding clause within these two documents that holds them to that standard of maintaining that building so it can be redeveloped. Because if it falls, it's in somewhat of a dire straits now. I don't know specifically, but if it's to fall, if it was to decline any further, then it could come forward that they would prefer to demolish that building. That building is significant to the neighborhood. It has some historical preference within the city, and I think it should be part of that redevelopment. And I think there should be some assurity that when it's passed over to PHA, that they'll keep that building together for that purpose. Right now, I don't see it in either one of the documents, and I stand to be corrected if
I can speak to that briefly. They, as part of their plan, they are planning on redeveloping a portion of the school. So their plan lays out how they're gonna redevelop the school as part of their development. It is 2 projects, like you said, and it is a unique site because it's city-owned, but the opportunity for a private developer to come in and do 2 projects could happen as well. The phasing is something we don't do on a single project, but they're doing theirs as 2 discrete projects. So one is a definitive start and the second one is a definitive start. And they showed at TAC and they'll show at the planning board what those projects entail, and as Peter described, the L building and then the second phase. So their plan is to redevelop that school, and if they don't plan to redevelop that school, that would not be in keeping with what they would agree to with the city. So
but what happens?
We'll see that when they get approval, that's part of their approval process.
Right. What happens 4 years from now when that school has had no maintenance and it's in a dire position for redevelopment? Did they just come forward and say, we had no obligation to maintain that building within our agreement with the city, even though it was within our plans?
Well, their agreement includes redevelopment of it, so that would include the maintenance of redeveloping it, so that's.
I would like to, I think it would be in behalf of the city and anybody concerned with that particular building, that there's something more definitive, that they keep some type of maintenance schedule for that building for redevelopment. It's only my opinion, but I don't see it captured in either one of the documents that I read.
Other discussion on Sherburne? John?
Yeah, I mean, I share some of the concerns with Eric, and the fact is that, I mean, if you look at the project, and again, I'm a lay person, but, having been involved in development of various municipal projects, certainly the most cost-effective way to do something is to start from scratch and do a new one. So the most cost-effective aspect of this project is the standalone building. I mean, that's a given. And, Peter's talking about the fact is that they have a plan. Well, the plan at least, and again, I know there's some differing opinions here, but the plan as I saw it was basically to do a whole project. Sometimes plans don't go forward the way they're intended. So I would hope that the city, first of all, would have the protection in place that Pete is talking about, that there'll be penalties if that school doesn't get developed. Because one of the things, I use, it's not a great analogy, but it's one I'm going to use anyways. When I was a young person, I was told that you always paint the back of the house first because that means that you'll get the whole house painted. If you do the front of the house, the back may never get painted because nobody's going to see it. And I'm a little concerned that what we might be dealing with here is that the front of the house, the 90 units, is the preferred project, and that the back of the project, the school, doesn't get done. So, again, I'm hoping that the city crafts a document that gives more, that gives some certainty to the whole project being done. Thank you.
Other comments, Byron?
Yeah, so I was interested in the concern around the phased approach. I'm hearing about the concern about the building, and I understand that. Is there other, like with the phased approach, are there other concerns beyond just back of the house painting sort of preference in terms of the phased notion, or is it just like the biggest concern is that we maintain the building and making sure that structure is in the neighborhood?
I think from my perspective, it would have been nice to see the whole project being done, to completion. Not to be phased. Because it creates 127 units versus
Okay,
97.
just-
So
we just get there.
that's
Yeah.
our purpose, is to create
Yeah.
as much
Yeah.
affordable housing. So, with a phase, in some reality, it's gonna be 4 years before that the Sherburne end of the project gets done, if it gets done.
But yeah, I'm just trying to understand like what the different aspects of the concern.
And it's from my understanding, it's completely financial. That
Sure,
was
I
what
think
they elected.
The
That's-
federal grant landscape is moon-like.
Yeah.
Craters.
Yeah, just to answer your question, from my perspective, I don't care phasing, splitting it, whatever. My only concern is that the project gets done as it was presented, period. And I don't care, how it happens. I don't wanna see us get half the loaf and not the full loaf.
And one of the benefits of having a housing authority in our community is that they're mission-driven, not profit-driven.
Sure.
So why would they start a project that is in service of their end goals of providing affordable housing for our community and slam on the brakes because they get one part of it done? Like, if we have to see the forest for the trees. This is what makes sense. If it has to be phased out, and again, I'm not saying I'm right. Perhaps my recollection is wrong. That certainly has happened multiple times in my life. But from my recollection,
to me, too.
yeah. From my recollection, PHA has always presented this plan as if we are going to do both of these, we're gonna have like phase 1 and phase 2. We had discussions about it in this group. Maybe it was POA. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they're being disingenuous if that's your concern.
Oh, and it's completely understandable that some of the financial, the financial end of it, there is just a difficult time, and if that's.
So the hangup is purely then that you are concerned as to the status, what happens to the Sherburne School building?
Yes, because that's been an important factor of, my participation in this process, along with anything else.
Yes.
Is that building has significance to that neighborhood, the community, and like John said, as it's been said, the way building goes this day, it's just to knock it down and start all over, and I just don't think that's.
Well, I think that's why we all were preferential towards any of the proposals that included the Sherburne being maintained. And we were also told during the RFP meeting that, I forget who it was, but we're told that school has good bones, that's in good shape.
Yes.
But it has additional expense to resurrect it into the use that it's gonna be proposed, that's
Sure.
been proposed.
Here's my concern, is that we are now years into this process and we haven't put a shovel in the ground. And so if we continue to badger the people who are working towards actually building these buildings and actually developing the Sherburne over details that are somewhat outside of their control and outside of our control, like what is the end game of that? And I understand your loyalty, we all have loyalties to parts of the city, but are we approaching it from concerns that are going to get borne out over time? And if we just trust the process, which maybe you don't trust the process, but trusting the process will allow us to go stage by stage and see what each stage yields. And right now, if we're learning that based on their ability to get financing, they have to take this approach, why throw ourselves in front of those
This
train
whole thing
tracks?
started January of 2023 with the initial meeting at the Sherburne School. Here we're sitting, in 2025, and we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah.
All right, and
absolutely.
it's not been because of the activity of this committee. This committee has tried to move everything as fast as it possibly can. It's the process. It is completely the process. From that meeting in January of 2023, it was 1 year before it was ever brought before the city council again. It was dropped. And so there was a year that went by. It was not on the city council's radar screen for at least a year. Then it was reintroduced and the process was passed to the city council, to the city manager, who initiated the process of an RFQ and an RFP. And that took.
We voted to have them.
What's that?
We voted for submissions of RFPs and RFQs.
I think I would focus our discussion on, is there more that we as a committee want to do here, rather than try and reconstruct history?
Right, no, history's.
My only, about going forward, okay, I'll take your lead and go forward. I just wanna know if they know of any other items that are going to come jumping up during this process. If I were here at the next meeting, and I don't believe I will be, I would be asking Craig, are there any other possible hiccups that, I've heard rumors that they're going to ask the city to pick up the cost of providing utilities to the site. Is that something, we never, not that we have to, but the fact that they wanted to have the fees waived, was never brought up till it was brought up at the council. Tell us everything that, so we know what to expect. Don't, like this here of phasing, I don't know about everybody else, but I read it in the paper. Tell us what's going on so that we're comfortable that we're, at least know what's going on in the process. And I don't, I'm sorry, but I don't consider that badgering. I think that that's asking questions appropriately, which we have a right and I feel an obligation to do.
No, it was a very,
I also cannot
it was a
be-
big process with a transparent process, and so
Yes.
that means that there's a lot of things out there in the public that everybody knows and wants to keep track of.
Sure.
I also won't be able to attend the next meeting when I guess Craig's gonna be here. I find that unfortunate because I'd like to hear it from him because I also have questions for him possibly, so,
Maybe at the end tonight, we can look at a different date.
Yeah.
Because we've got a month.
Yeah, got a month.
Let me just check in with everybody, unless we want to go further on Sherburne. Low interest housing loan fund is a quick update. RKG is a quick update. The future meeting topic is a fairly substantial discussion, and we have public comment. We could, I think though that there's time for your trust fund topic. So,
Thank you.
If the committee would accept that as a aid to my faltering 70-year-old memory.
What of the housing trust fund, I just want to throw out an idea. We've had some discussions and some people have had input. This is not a unique idea of mine. It's a compilation of things that have been said around the table. But one of the things that when we look at some of the stuff that we're dealing with, we've got people paying when they can't comply with the ordinance the way it's written, they're paying money in lieu of it that helps the process along. I want to suggest, we suggested that the mayor send out a letter to the local communities talking about affordable housing. And bottom line is we got nothing, I never saw any of the letters, but from what I understand, what he got back basically said, thanks, but no thanks. I mean, so is there a way, and I can understand, I mean, we've talked around this table and frankly, we've talked about it for 40 years. You know, like Newcastle doesn't have any property. They're not gonna have affordable housing in Newcastle. I don't mean to pick on them, but they're an easy one to pick on. But can they help the process? And as we talked about earlier, the city of Portsmouth, in conjunction, with Kane, put $500,000 into the Housing Trust Fund. If we go through that, that runs up to about, $23 per person. Because we've got 23,000, whatever it is, So could we go out to the local towns and say, we realize you don't have any property, but you also recognize that affordable housing is an issue. So as opposed to doing it with property, how about contributing to the Housing Trust Fund? So we go out to Newington, Newcastle, etc., and ask them, you said you can't do anything with property, but if you believe that affordable housing is an issue, how about contributing financially to the Housing Trust Fund that will help deal with that issue? Just a thought. I'm not looking for, but I'm saying if they can't, if they're blocking or they can't or whatever it is, everyone keeps saying that this is not a Portsmouth issue. It's a regional issue. It's an area issue. So let's find a vehicle where other communities can find a way to at least make a contribution to a process that tries to help this problem we're dealing with. Thank you.
Andrew and then Eric?
For sure, definitely, because all of those communities either contribute or participate, or more importantly, benefit from Portsmouth's economy, and I think that's the headliner. And I would use an analogy that Portsmouth has been advocating for decades, is the rooms and meals tax, and looking at, if that was parsed out to the individual cities and towns that create it or generate it, then Portsmouth would be the headliner. Now you have people in Atkinson and Epping coming at you with torches because nobody is, the rooms and meals tax doesn't even hold a candle to it. So to draw that comparison to a close, what you're suggesting is, yes, a community-wide effort, but it is not a Portsmouth Housing Trust effort, because the Portsmouth Housing Trust has a charter and a mission statement that directs it to do things only in Portsmouth, and I don't think you would get much buy-in for other communities. So I would push your efforts towards the Rockingham Planning Commission and looking at how the developments in Portsmouth are impacting Rockingham County in general. And I think by doing that and showing what the residual economic benefit of those surrounding communities would be, you would then get much better buy-in. So the presentation can't come from within Portsmouth, because that's hey, we're inside the house already and we're robbing you. So I would say that the tonality of it would be rather tough if it was the city of Portsmouth saying it versus Rockingham Planning Commission or someone similar.
Eric?
Thank you. I brought this up once before, and I think I got the answer that we need a bridge or we need a toll booth.
Into Newcastle? Into Newcastle?
From Newcastle and Newington into Portsmouth.
From Greenland to Newcastle to the whole surrounding community.
When we say live free or die,
What's that?
when we say live free or die, and like the headline of our state is no income tax, no estate tax, no sales tax.
It's pay free or die.
I mean, like,
What?
It's pay free or die. But anyhow, I mean, in theme of this, you know, Portsmouth, I think, some of a back of the envelope, we've got $5.5 million invested in this already. The property at Sherburne, with the $500,000 that's in the trust fund, with $1 million projected for a new softball field that's going to replace the one that's being taken away. So we've got a substantial investment into this whole thing. I think from a perspective, you know, the city of Portsmouth provides outlying communities with police, fire, school, recreation, water, sewer, senior benefits, library benefits. They provide a lot of things to these outlying communities. And so I think it's time for, it's not within the realm of this committee, but I think it's within the realm of the city councils that we have here, that we can take more of an aggressive stand. We had that initial contact with them, and the result of that wasn't tremendously received. But I think you got to step it up a notch, because this is not just, I agree, this is not just Portsmouth's problem. This is a community problem. And they will eventually benefit. Whatever takes place in Portsmouth, these outlying communities will benefit in some way, shape, and manner. And without a contribution from them, it just seems that from an equity perspective, it's just not an even playing field. So I think at least some discussion within the city council to up the game a little bit and see what type of response you get again. There's plenty of people from outside communities that making comment on affordable housing in Portsmouth. Well, why don't these communities, step it up a little bit? I think that's only a reasonable request. And if it can come from the Rockingham Planning Committee, then so be it. There's another form of advocacy for these towns to step up in some capacity for what we're doing here.
Other discussion on John's idea?
Yeah, and this might serve as a transition too, or a bridge, one without a toll. What you're talking about, I think, is best served if we're trying to engage with private enterprise and a low-interest housing fund where, rather than going to the city of Newcastle, we might find a more willing partner with the Wenders, who sees value in being able to retain their employees by allowing them to have housing in Portsmouth. I think what Andrew was saying is spot on too, where it's like, squeezing blood from the stone, we're talking about there being a resistance to utilities being free for the Sherburne property in Portsmouth. Is Newcastle or Dover or Newington really going to be willing to shell out any of their tax dollars to help us solve a problem that, yes, is impacting them and the state at large? But I do think there's a lot of great information in this Upper Valley Workforce Housing Program about using these private enterprises to generate the type of money that incentivizes developers to actually build units and make a profit off of it.
Yeah. Further discussion? Or we move on to the low interest loan fund idea?
Did you have any other statements, John?
No, I'm fine. I mean, I just wanted to throw it out there, and I appreciate the input. It certainly is kind of interesting, and the fact is that this whole thing is a process, and coming up with an idea that may not go forward as I initially envisioned is not a big deal. I think the idea is that let's look at what we can do to move this process along, in any way we can do it works for me.
Right. And the more irons in the fire, the more chances for success. I put in your packets the information on the Upper Valley Loan Fund, and they're having good success over there. What I wanted to report is, first of all, when we did talk to our developers, in those sequence of interviews we did, all of them said, this will help us. This will help us build housing that's more affordable. And I just wanted to report that Jen Stebbins Thomas reached out to Service Credit Union early in the year, maybe it was last year, we had conversations with Piscataqua Bank, good enthusiasm. And there's a couple more financial institutions we'd like to talk to. And the next steps are a little fuzzy at this point, but I think we're getting a nucleus of support to start with.
Do you know if we have an equivalent to Evernorth locally?
Well, Evernorth serves all of New England.
Okay, great.
And, you know, at some point, I think they become part of this. I would imagine we create a steering committee at some point that has local leaders involved.
I don't know if there's something as critical as this piece of the puzzle. I really think that like the financing side is so critical.
Well, especially after RKG's presentation last.
Yes.
I think it's like the particle in the wave. I think, to be able to see anything, that's a huge,
And I can tell you that the local financial institutions, the ones that are locally owned, that are not national.
Those are investment banks, really.
They not only see the need, they want to participate because they also get tax credit for investing in their community. So it's good for them. It's good business for them. So there's a couple more people we'd like to recruit, and then hopefully we can get a steering committee together. So that's that. And RKG, you all had our July meeting where they gave their findings. Peter, do you want to just update us on what's next with that?
Well, they're gonna take the information they collected and put it into a report and with more detail, providing sort of the backup for what they presented at the meeting and how it worked, and then input they got, they'll incorporate that as well, and then make some recommendations on how we can update our zoning ordinance to better address workforce housing, essentially.
Right.
Basically, I think we were a little too ambitious, maybe, with our attempt in zoning, is what their analysis shows. And so maybe back it out a little bit. One of their suggestions was take the additional housing they get for workforce and use that as a starting point. But we'll see how they play that out in a zoning
Yeah, I think they're gonna come back with zoning recommendations
recommendations for it.
and present that at another meeting.
That's to me where the rubber hits the road, is when we get some recommendations that.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think it'll be a little bit fewer maybe units we would get from each development, but we might see more developments providing units. So hopefully that's
So you're saying there's an additional report coming from RKG?
yeah, there'll be a report from what they're working on.
What type of timeline do you?
I think this fall,
The next couple months.
So hopefully they'll recommend ways to modify what we have.
Oh yeah, that's their task.
Lastly, future meeting topics. We developed a pretty good list that we report to the council of things that we can do. And I think the community is looking at how does all this get enacted. Does it go into the master plan? That takes time. Are there things we can do quickly? And that's a good discussion that we should have. For example, we had parcels that could be made gateway zoning. That's something that we've smoothly done through the planning board and then up to the council in the past. You've got recommendation about increasing density in the sort of Islington Street example of these Victorians, loosening the regulations on those, that's a little more complicated. I think that takes a lot of public engagement. So I'd be interested from the committee's point of view on where you see we might be able to enact things in the next 6 to 12 months as opposed to waiting for a master plan.
That leads me to a point. We're a Blue Ribbon Committee, and my understanding is Blue Ribbon Committees go until the change in council. So I think what we may need to think about doing is what can we do between now and the end of the year? Because we know we're going to be in place for that period of time. And then how do we set the stage for moving forward if another Blue Ribbon Committee is established with the new council? So I think that, we have to kind of face the reality that, the committee as it exists right now may not continue in its current form. And how do we plan for that, if you will? I mean, that's just a question.
No, I think that is the question. We don't know what the new council will want. We know that housing is still gonna be just as much of a crisis then as it is now, and I think there's plenty of work to do.
Yeah.
And lastly, one of the discussions we haven't had, and I put this down in the agenda, is if we want to look at multiple units in the existing buildings, and if we want to look at areas the density could be increased, we have pretty restrictive parking. And there's two parts to the parking puzzle. One is what's already in discussion at the planning board, which is making the parking table, eliminating the parking table for 7 units and larger, and making that part of site review. And that's something in discussion, right, in your planning board? So
It's in Peter's head.
Yeah. There's also a recent law that passed that we're gonna have to make a zoning amendment to only require one parking space per unit, where now we have 1.3, so that will help.
So that, maybe it's been done by state statute, at least so. Yeah, the second part is what are the requirements for 7 and below? That could be something that we focus on in the future. We've got a great parking study that the council received, and it urges that we look at our parking minimums, not only from the housing point of view, but from the point of view of the needs of the city for parking. So, it's coming at it from both ends. So that's why I thought it might be an appropriate topic for us in September. Eric?
Under this whole umbrella of incentives, when we first started, we had the broad vision of housing in totality in the shortage that exists. And now, and that hasn't changed. But I wonder what our focus will be with incentives, because right now we know we're competing with market rate housing, and market rate housing is winning. And we just, that's the struggle we're having with something that's affordable, but we have something in the pipeline. And so where will our focus on incentives be? Will they be incentives to benefit market rate housing, or will it be benefits to, for more affordable housing or workforce housing? I think there's a distinct difference between the two, and what will our focus from an incentive perspective be?
Good question. Beth?
I think we should take a look harder at 79E and see if we can find a way for that to help, because that allows them to be able to, developers, to be able to sometimes get a tax break for a period of years based off of them providing workforce housing. So I think we could really take a harder look at that and really detail out where we could fit that in our city. I've tried before and had difficulty on my own, but maybe with more heads looking at it, we could come up with some ways. So I think that could be a great discussion and great research for everyone. Go read 79E.
And it's in use in communities around us.
It is. Exeter uses it a lot.
Yeah, I think we've spent a whole lot of time thinking about different types of developers, the nonprofit space, POA and PHA, and larger developers and overlay districts, how to incentivize them. The parking minimums are also sort of around density where developers are probably involved. None of it, well, I think there's been limited focus on getting feedback from individual homeowners and what they would like to be able to do more easily with their own properties. So that's in like the world of the ADUs. Like where can we ease restrictions such that individual property owners and not developers that we're focusing on? I think if we approach the issue from that perspective in terms of focusing it as how can we empower and alleviate burden for people who live here, individual property owners, I think that may be a great ramp for increasing density in some of those neighborhoods.
And I think that's something we could do well if we manage to engage those homeowners and landlords.
In case this group doesn't know, September 15th, am I right? September 15th, our consultant for the master plan is going to be at the library, and I'm hoping that maybe a lot of these committee members can actually be there, because these are some of the things that if you talk to them about it, they will continue to gather some of that information for us because they're out there talking to the community. So I think it would be really important for as many people, especially on this committee, that can make it to that event.
I think perfect example is there's a property on Ocean Road right now. It's sort of like a funky cobbled together. It's on like a bigger parcel. It's like a half an acre, and it could be multiple units, but it's just probably burdened in terms of zoning and like old lot splits and whatever's gone on there. And that's the perfect example where like that's an individual property owner, and there's a great opportunity there for 2 or 3 units, and there's probably all manner of walls that a single person homeowner just doesn't have the resource to get past.
I think that goes
That's a
back
good-
to our density too, dwelling units per
Yeah.
lot size and that kind of conversation.
And that's a good case study right there.
Yeah.
Pain points for that.
Just along those lines, another law that got passed and went into effect immediately is
Yeah.
the ADU law that allows ADUs by right in every zone, basically, every residential zone.
I'd love to hear from planning how that interacts with where our stuff is. I'd love just like a updated, this is the state of the world relative to ADUs. Because I think when something like that comes downstream from the state, it isn't always clear how that interacts with local laws and regulations. And just so like maybe there'd be, what's that?
It doesn't, it supersedes.
It overrides
It
that.
supersedes.
So we have to do
But it
amendments.
Supersedes it.
Yeah, we have to amend a little bit, because right now you need a conditional use permit, whereas, right, if you
So
can
there
do it by
does,
right.
I mean, like, there does need to be changes a little bit.
Does
Yeah.
need to be
Yeah.
changes to our zoning,
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
to comply with that. So it's making it easier to do an ADU.
So at the end of that rainbow, I'd love to see like this is what has changed from what was previous, is just for the community to understand that better. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 79E, we've got talking to homeowners about barriers. And then we've also got changing our zoning for 7 units and over so that parking is part of site review. And then we could also tee up a discussion about parking for 7 units and under, supported by the parking study.
I'll take the whole shopping cart. Love it.
We'll do the all of the above. Okay.
Public comment?
Public comment? Yes.
Gerald Duffy, 428 Pleasant Street.
Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I recommend that the committee goes out with a bang at the end of this year.
Actual explosions.
So we do have a housing crisis, right? Median home and rental prices remain high. I'm sure Andrew knows all about the state of the market. And the demand continues and people continue to be priced out all the time. So my memory is that the housing committee remit included idea generation. I remember the co-chair saying that she hoped there would be creative innovation solutions coming out of this committee. That would be recommendations to the Council of Planning Board, and that would move the needle, in some way. So in that spirit, you'll find John sent out a packet from us, a very short proposal of what we're calling quick fixes, low-hanging fruit. They're tweaks to zoning that could start to move the needle in different ways. They come under the rubric of working with what we have, right? The properties that we have right now, and they would take advantage of some quick changes. So I would urge the committee to look hard at this list. The list in the document that John included actually comes from this committee. You were asked by the council to come up with low-hanging fruit, the zoning things that would make a difference, zoning changes that would make a difference. So you did that, and you had 2 meetings where you pretty much discussed those things exclusively. So the document that you handed out is based on an analysis of the transcripts of those 2 meetings. So the proposal is actually based on everything that you came up with. And so one of the concerns the advocates have is that the master plan's coming up, and the master plan itself will take time. I gather a little faster this time than last time. But even after that's over, any zoning that comes out, that will have to be done as subsequently. So we're looking at perhaps 3-4 years before anything actually kicks in from changes that are made as a result of the master plan. So we're saying that's really not fast enough. We have a housing crisis. We're losing people every month. And so it would be really good, I think, if this committee proposed a bundle of fixes that you can implement very quickly, going through the process, perhaps finding ways to speed it up, that would start to create potential for some of the things that Byron was talking about. And I'll just give you an example from my own neighborhood within a block of me. We're in the process of losing, over the course of last year and this year, 10 what we call naturally occurring affordable homes. So these are properties a little down in the mouth. They've been neglected, deferred maintenance, as they say, but they rent below market. So these are $1,600, $1,700 a month. The landlord of one of them, I hear, is getting ready to sell, and so there's one or two things will happen. They'll become high-priced condos, or they'll become high-end rentals. So the medical technician that I know in one of these units will be looking. I don't know if he'll be able to afford to stay in Portsmouth, because from $1,600 to the market rate would be a big jump for him. So he's just kind of an example of what's happening month in, month out in the city. And so we can't stop that, but the city can do things to mitigate it. And so some of the proposals we made in that document, that's the spirit behind them, is to actually start moving the needle a little bit from the point of view of individual homeowners. Thank you,
Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Yes.
Robin Schnell.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, I live in Portsmouth, and I came here tonight just to advocate for having this housing commission keep in mind that we always have people who don't live in houses. They live in their cars, they live rough, and I've been working with that population in some form for the past 40 years, and it's not going away. It's everywhere, and they're not just gonna curl up and die. They're not gonna go away. So keep them in mind as far as their needs go. South Church has a shower program and Home for All. That came up from the very first meeting that I went to for Homes for All, that we not forget these people and find a way to acknowledge that they're in our community and help them out. One of the things I've also heard from the first I've been involved in this is, oh, if you do anything to help them, everybody's gonna wanna live that way. Or, you're gonna be pulling in homeless people from everywhere. And that just doesn't happen, it's, but don't forget them. That's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. Other public comment?
No.
Jim Smalley. Welcome back.
Thank you. I regret not being able to attend the July 10th meeting, but I would like to have a few comments on it. So, especially as you're going to be talking about it next time. The parking minimum piece, the speaker said there's no benefit if it's the same number. No kidding, right? If it's like saying a clock is right twice a day. If the benefit, let's say the benefit is the same, the number of units is the same, parking requirement. One is intrinsically better because it's market-based and calibrated to the market, as opposed to government-based and arbitrary. A developer will come in and calibrate what they need to sell that property. That is superior to any government-mandated requirement. John, you brought up the height piece. A 10-story building somewhere in the city. I thought the response was a little odd, during the open remarks, and actually part of it throughout the same theme. Portsmouth is in very high demand, and at one point the presenter said, not likely to meet that demand. If height isn't an issue, why have the height restrictions at all? You indicated that a 10-story building would fail because steel is different materials needed. The only reason that I can think of is if it's eliminated, it would undermine the incentive for workforce housing as currently structured. But you're giving up supply with that height restriction to achieve a narrow goal. So you undermine one because you want to achieve the other. And we've had years and years and years and years and years and decades of losing supply because of height restrictions. Artificial government requirements, mandated restrictions. You should notice again that the fewer the required units to get density bonus, the more successful the project would be. That's the basic math. And I've been saying since day one, it's a cost. It's not an incentive, it's a cost. You have to minimize the cost. Part of that presentation also included subsidies, which if you tax something, you get less of it. If you subsidize, you get more of it. Hopefully that will come back. The example of Massachusetts, which does mandate workforce units, was given as a successful example. And there are pockets in Massachusetts where it is successful. They put them near transit areas, etc. But this ignores 5 decades of economic research that the more that is mandated, the fewer the total supply. So you get more workforce units, but you end up with a lower overall supply and higher costs around for those that are not workforce units. So there's a price to pay for that mandate. Andrew, you gave a great laundry list of potential solutions that would add to supply by using existing structures, lands, the single family to multifamily, etc. Those should be vigorously pursued, as doing so naturally increases supply by removing the government restrictions on supply that are currently in place through the zoning and the current zoning. That's a market-based solution that will go much further and much quicker than the workforce housing approach, because you don't have all the legal hurdles you have to jump through. You don't. Here's 2 examples. Austin, Texas, which has seen housing costs going way up. They've actually been coming down from their peak. New Rochelle, just outside of New York, is an expensive place to live. It's growing fast, but it's providing both market and workforce housing, and it's lowering the average cost of housing in that community. It did so by simplifying the process. So it's not just about the zoning, but the process, which can, they shorten the time to approval, which lowers the risk of development. Housing that, and ultimately the goal there is housing that's affordable, not just workforce housing. They're looking at the full picture there. And we were just talking about that. Just a note on the solo effect. Artists like Andy Warhol, they ended up moving out of lower Manhattan over to Dumbo in Brooklyn. And what happened in Brooklyn was, as that became, it was a depressed area, and as that became more attractive and more people, the artists began moving to that area, they began passing restrictions on conversions, which restricted, now again, a solution that a lot of the zoning is just preventing supply. And that really should be a part of the focus. Competing with market rate housing, and market rate housing is winning. Market prices are artificially high because of the zoning that restricts supply, and has done so for years. Not just here, but everywhere. This is a self-created problem. Both new and existing, and that applies to both new and existing housing. If you remove the constraints, the barriers, and allow for flexibility, whether it be conversion of existing, the homes that can add another room, rent out a room, whatever, you're increasing supply, which can only help. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Attending that has their hand raised.
Hi, Tom. Good evening. My name is Tom Neese. I live on Richards Avenue in Portsmouth. I'm going to comment a little bit on some of the points that have been raised. I think that what's needed are effective solutions, and I think some of the things that are being proposed are not really effective solutions, and I'll explain why. Referring to the document submitted by the housing advocates, if you look at number 1 where they talk about parking and they talk about removing the parking requirement, I went back and looked at the legal notices since 2023. There's not been a single request to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a waiver from the number of parking spaces that are required, which makes me wonder how effective removing the requirement would be. You could also say, why do we need the requirement if no one is bothering to get a waiver from it? But I think if you're looking at that and you're expecting a big influx or a big change in the amount of housing that goes on, I think that's going to be unlikely in a lot of the areas. The second point I'll point out from that is, number 4, where they talk about the conversions. We have 2 zoning areas, I believe, maybe 3, general residence A and B, where you're allowed multifamily conversions. Most of those houses were built before 1980. And yet when I look around the neighborhood, because I live in one of those areas, what's happening is the opposite. People are taking some units that are already multifamily and they're converting them to single family. There have been at least a couple in my block and a couple in my neighborhood. I'm not sure how widespread that is. Which suggests to me that, while laudable, I don't know that we should bet the ranch on the fact that just making that change is going to lead to a lot of additional housing. And the same thing goes on with their reference to the cottage cluster. The development in Dover is truly unique and I think truly wonderful, but when you look into the details, there are a lot of unusual circumstances that went on with that cottage cluster approach that I'm not sure are really going to be easy to replicate. For starters, the property that was used for those cottage clusters was a 7-acre lot that was purchased for about $500,000 back in 2020. In addition to that, the developer, for a number of reasons, and I'm not criticizing for this at all, but they did a lot of the work themselves. One of them was a contractor. He didn't take any salary, and he admitted that he had no profit motive and was not taking any profit from the development. So while we may be able to find a few places in here where we won't find some nonprofit that's willing to do the same thing, I think it's unrealistic to think that we're going to get a huge influx by making those changes. Now, I'm not suggesting that that means that changes are unnecessary or shouldn't be pursued, but I am suggesting that we need to be realistic about what the results are going to be. The only other thing I'd say is that, generally speaking, if we were between development of the master plan, I would understand why there would be an urge to try and get this done outside of the master plan process. But we're not. We're in the process of developing the master plan. And from my point of view, that's where these sort of changes should come through. They should be factored into the master plan in a holistic approach so that zoning changes are made in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else?
Will we adjourn?
Can I just clarify one
Excuse
thing
me.
that was just said? There are no more variance requests about parking to the ZBA because we moved it into the planning board, because there's conditional use permits around parking now. So it's just was a change in our zoning. So I just want to make sure that was understood. It's not because
Different
our,
process.
right, it's just a different process, but it's still, there are issues. I didn't want everyone to think that, why are we making these changes?
Right, and we also heard unanimously from private developers we talked to about moving this into site review. You got the classic case where a property is office and residential, and the office people clear out at 5 o'clock and you have parking. Yeah. Well, the developer sees all that. So if you make that
Shared
part
parking is very
site
good.
review, Anything else for the committee tonight? Thank you all. We've got thanks for the help setting the agenda for September, and is it still the desire of the committee that we have Craig Welsh? You two should.
I would like to, I can't be here,
could
but
ask him to come in October.
I would like to attend a meeting that he's here.
Can't discriminate.
I think John would be.
between discriminating.
you guys,
Yeah.
John.
Well, we could
Only thing you
I will
look
also
at.
be absent on the 11th.
Okay, let's see if we can.
A few things that you can designate.
If we met on Wednesday night instead of Thursday night, the 10th.
I'll also be
I have RPC that night.
They were the ones who brought that up.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Tuesday night.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then the Thursday prior to the 4th, I don't know if that drives. Oh, we have
What other
not-
days?
Gingigen buying, no thank you.
Not October?
Why don't we just look at October 9th?
For Craig.
Right,
Okay.
Is that our October meeting?
Thank you.
Yeah.
it is.
Let's do that.
I'll make sure I don't work that day. Thank you.
If otherwise, we're ready to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Thank you all.